Benjamin Disraeli, who was UK Prime Minister twice, had his main home at Hughenden, Buckinghamshire. It's about an hour west of central London. He lived in the house from 1848 until his death in 1881. Buying the house and land helped him in politics because it made him appear more aristocratic. At the age of 22, he released his first novel. It was about the love life of the aristocracy. However, he wasn't an aristocrat, plus he was young, and so he was disliked by the critics. He's the only Jew to have been Prime Minister, although his religion was technically Anglican. If he had been brought up as a Jew rather than an Anglican, he wouldn't have become PM because Jews weren't allowed to be MPs until 1858, whereas he became an MP for Maidstone in 1837. At that time, there were two MPs for the same constituency. However, the other died shortly after the election, leaving behind his widow, Mary Ann. She was 12 years older than Disraeli and wealthy due to her inheritance. In today's money, she would have received about £500,000 to £600,000 per year as her inheritance. Disraeli courted Mary Ann initially for her money, but they did also fall in love. She was quoted as saying, "Disraeli married me for money, but he would do it again for love."
Plaster cast of Disraeli's wife. He was very friendly with Queen Victoria, who apparently had a habit of doing a plaster cast of each of her children's feet.
Wow.
Disraeli decided to do the same.
Right.
So
That's a lady's foot. That's very
yes,
big.
that's his wife's foot.
She had big feet.
I think it's quite small actually by modern day standards.
Maybe it just looks big on the table then.
Well, obviously you've got a bit extra for
Yeah.
the base.
Mm.
Slightly strange thing to do, but
Yes. No television.
when Benjamin Disraeli lived here, this was the drawing room.
Right.
The library was in that room.
Oh, okay.
Which is not very good for books because normally
Right.
it's quite a sunny room, it's sort of south
Okay.
facing. So when Coningsby, his nephew, inherited, he swapped them over.
Ah.
Disraeli liked to see the sun dancing on the back of the books apparently, but it's not very good for the books.
No.
Because he'd inherited a lot of them from his father,
Right.
who had about 30,000 books apparently. Although he sold quite a lot of them to try and recover some of his debts. But
Disraeli was in debt for most of his life. He came into money in his 20s and invested in South American mining operations. However, these failed. This saddled him with debt for the rest of his life. MPs couldn't be put in debtor's prison, and this may have influenced his career choice. In March 1868, Lord Derby stepped down as leader of the Conservative Party and as Prime Minister due to ill health. Disraeli then became Prime Minister. However, he lost the general election 9 months later. In 1874, he won the general election and remained Prime Minister until 1880. He was a Conservative Prime Minister, however, he was very different to the landed gentry that filled the House of Commons at the time. He was a bit of a womaniser, romantic, writer, ambitious and middle class. As PM, he passed 8 social reform acts. He also increased Britain's power on the international stage, including purchasing for Britain the controlling shares in the Suez Canal, which made trade between the UK and India much quicker. He was a good friend to Queen Victoria. She asked him where he stood on religion, as he was Jewish by birth and Anglican by religion. He replied that he was the blank page between the Old and the New Testament. Queen Victoria tried many times to give him honours, however he would have moved from the Commons to the Lords and so wouldn't have been Prime Minister for the second period. At Disraeli's request, his wife became Lady Beaconsfield in her own right in 1871. However, unfortunately, she died shortly after that. In 1832 he twice stood for election. The second time was at the general election. He made himself a chair so that he could be held high after winning. This was custom at the time. However, he came last and the chair was never used. It took him 5 attempts to become an MP. Disraeli had no children, so the house was inherited by his nephew, who also had no children. In 1936 it was sold to W.H. Abbey, who bought it with the intention of giving it to the National Trust. However, in 1941 the government appropriated it for war services. Maps were made there so that RAF pilots knew where to bomb. The map makers were a mixture of RAF crew and civilians. They were brought to the house under darkness and not told what they were going to do. They were made to sign the Secrecy Act. They remained there until 1946, when they thoroughly cleaned out any evidence they had ever been there. From 1947 it was owned by the National Trust and used as a Disraeli museum. In 2004, an elderly gentleman took his grandson to the house and explained about his work as a map maker during World War II. This was overheard by a National Trust volunteer who asked questions, and once the government agreed to release the grandfather from the official Secrets Act, a thorough investigation took place covering former workers and government documents. In the Victorian age, it was unusual for husband and wife to sleep together every night, however the Disraelis did. The yellow colour theme in the bedroom was inspired by their trips to Paris. During Disraeli's time there was no running water, however their toilet had a flush and Disraeli would wash in a tub next to the fire. The maids must have had to bring a lot of hot water. house was originally built in the 1700s but was largely remodelled by Disraeli when he bought it in 1848. It was originally classical Georgian but was redesigned to be more Gothic. The west wing, the area that the RAF mainly worked in, was built by Disraeli's nephew in 1910. Disraeli didn't have a state funeral, and so the Queen was unable to attend due to protocol. However, she visited his house a few days later and spent considerable time alone in Disraeli's study, leaving primroses on his grave at the church. She also instructed that the study was to be left as it is. When the RAF used the house, they shut the study door and didn't use the room in honour of Queen Victoria's request. Disraeli was a great orator, and some of his sayings are still used today. He was a flatterer, especially towards women, but behind that was the ability to get along with people and form long-term friendships and relationships, with the best examples being his wife and Queen Victoria. He was politically enlightened, especially for his time, both in his social reforms and international policies. He was helped by having a great cabinet which he would have chosen. This year the UK will have a general election. It's a shame he isn't standing, although it's unclear what party he would fit into. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like button, and if you want to watch more videos from around the UK, the subscribe and bell button.